This minor character fits the bill of a technically important character, in that, well, he's not nobody by title and by heritage, but he's definitely a very, very minor character in the story. And his story, what little there is of it, has been somewhat inconsistent and maybe a bit odd over the years. And, well, to be frank, it was quite clear that Blizzard probably had no idea what to do with him. I suppose this will be the first minor character that I cover that I don't view in a positive light, not necessarily due to a fault of his own, rather because of the overall storytelling that he was a part of. The character I'm talking about is Aliden Pernold, Crown Prince and rightful heir to the Kingdom of Alterac. That's why he's wearing a Stormwind tabard in-game. I trust the reason is obvious. Now, Aliden is a character that had some real potential, on paper anyway. As most of you may know, during the Second War, the Kingdom of Alterac betrayed the rest of the Alliance to the Horde, and as a result was placed under Alliance occupation thereafter. The kingdoms of the Alliance bickered over what exactly should be done with Alterac. Should the kingdom be disbanded and its territories divided among them? Should they simply depose King Aiden Pernold, Alden's father, and just appoint a new king? And if so, whom? Isiden Pernold, the king's nephew who fled to Gilneas and was supported by Gen Greymane? Aliden Pernold, the rightful heir but someone considered, by some, to be too inexperienced and unfitting? Or maybe this Lord Davos Prester fellow, apparently a distant relative of Altrac's royal line, who totally wasn't Deathwing manipulating the entire situation from the shadows. Ahem. Now, even after Deathwing was removed from the equation, the whole Altrac situation didn't reach a conclusion, causing the alliance of Lordran to break apart, and the mountains of Alterac to be inhabited by all sorts of unsavory creatures. Gnolls, ogres, bandits, etc. Basically, Alterac society collapsed and the kingdom was no more. Throughout all of this, one might look at Alden Pernold in a sympathetic light. While foreign nations are squabbling over the fate of his kingdom, and the nobles increasingly begin turning to banditry to survive, he is one of the sole voices fighting for Alterac to be preserved as a whole. And not only that, but to be once again recognized as equal to the other nations in the Alliance. And indeed, the novel Beyond the Dark Portal very briefly portrays him in this light. When his father once again makes a deal with the Horde, young Aliden is practically furious that his father ruined his efforts to rebuild Altrax and their family's standing and reputation, and actually punches him in the face. This, unfortunately, is the highlight of Aliden's character. From this point on, things get kind of weird. Basically, while Aliden does become the eventual leader of the Syndicate, a group of renegades composed primarily of former Alterac nobles and their subordinates, who basically engage in banditry to survive in the general Alterac region, what little remains of his story does not really follow this plotline. Instead, did you know that Alden Pernold became a massive racist against the orcs and even wanted them put back in internment camps? And not because of his father's dealings with them, rather because he was a subordinate of Adelas Blackmore? Well, he did, and he was, apparently. Because for some reason, while the entire squabble over his kingdom was happening, Alden decided that the best political and personal move would be to join the ranks of Blackmore, who was just a Lordaeron Lieutenant General at the time. Though, to his credit, he did move on to take charge of the Syndicate before Durnhold Keep was destroyed by Thrall. Well, he hated orcs so much, though not to the point that he would not associate with the Shadow Council, and loved Blackmore so much that he decided to steal the pendant of Thrall's old friend, Tarafa, who was also Blackmore's unwilling mistress, presumably killing what remained of her family in the process. Thrall, as War Chief of the Horde, very much wanted that pendant back, so he sent adventurers to kill Alden. That's it, that's his entire story, well, at least canonically. Now, each of these could be explained to make sense if you really tried, but if you just throw this information in a hodgepodge, it seems absurd. It's pretty obvious that they had no idea what to do with Aliden and with Alterac as a whole, so, well, whenever something evil happened in the area that wasn't associated with the Scourge, just say that they're related to Aliden, Pernold and the Syndicate and call it a day. How else could you explain the connection between Blackmoor, the Shadow Council and the Royal House of Alterac? I never thought those three could fit in the same sentence before. Also, his very presentation in the game. He wears a Stormwind tabard, he is dressed in full plate armor, and yet uses priest abilities. I suppose you could say he's a prototype of Anduin. Also, I find it funny that he's dressed in full armor and carries his weapon drawn, while he's just hanging out with his mistress in their hidden safe house. This lack of direction also extends to Alterac as a whole. The first and most obvious piece of evidence was that it was barely updated with Cataclysm and that the area was merged with Hillsbrad Foothills. Another one is the quest The Pernold Tiara, where a Stormwind noble tells you, "Did you know that there was once a family named Pernold who ruled Alterac? Well, their crown was made by Ironforge jewelers and I would very much like to add it to my personal collection. Could you fetch it for me?" Now, Aliden is one of the rare cases where the RPG books, which are now non-canon, paint a much more interesting story of the character. Basically, while they don't touch at all on his questionable connection with Blackmoor, they do go into detail how the Syndicate is basically a very loose coalition of nobles who aren't exactly eager to obey Aliden. They explain how Aliden bid his time and only struck out in an attempt to reclaim Alterac during the Third War when, well, everything else was going on. And also how he basically had to drag and shove every noble in the Syndicate to follow along because of all the infighting. They explain how Aliden tried to safeguard the Syndicate by breaking up the various bandit gangs that joined the organization so they could not unite to overthrow the nobles. All of this is interesting politicking that you don't often see in Warcraft, and all of it is non-canon now. Instead, Aliden Pernold, former Crown Prince of Alterac, was just a racist leading a gang of thugs who also had a gigantic fetish for Blackmoor. Which pretty much brings us to the end of his story. Thank you all very much for watching and listening to me, and I will see you all next time. Farewell.